I'm an alumnus. I'm a graduate of SSA, 1982. 1982. This is the first time I've been back, I think, since 1982. And it still looks like an auto showroom. I am the editorial page editor of the Chicago Sun-Times. I've always been a reporter. I was a reporter before I came to SSA, and I've stayed in that field. And I'll tell you a couple of things about my experience just to get started. I came to SSA in 1982, having already worked at the Chicago Tribune and the suburban bureaus. And I wrote them a letter saying that I have no interest in being a social worker. I'm not constitutionally inclined to be a very good social worker, but I am interested in social welfare issues. I was raised right to think there's more to life than a paycheck and that we should do something worthwhile, and I cared about the very issues that this school is built on. So I wrote them a letter saying, I don't want to be a social worker, but can I come to your school? And they said, sure, which I just thought was fantastic. And then they said, and you can take half your courses across the midway, anywhere on the campus, as long as it was graduate level stuff, and we'll pay a lot of your tuition. And for a kid who had always worked his way through school, this was fantastic. I was talking earlier to a couple of people here, and you know they say that SSA takes great pride in that the folks who come to the school are not always the privileged, not always the people who come from money. And I did not come from poverty, but I sure didn't come from money. I was a kid who grew up in Chicago on the South Side, and I went to all the public schools. And honest to God, I think part of the appeal of coming to SSA and to the University of Chicago as a Chicagoan was just to see if I could cut it at this world-class school. And I think for a lot of people, that's the honest answer to why they go to a school like this, just to see if you can cut it. And if you can cut it, and you have to work really hard to do it, I think it puts you in good stead the rest of your life. I want to share a couple of stories. I had to work very hard here. I think I learned how to work really hard at SSA. I was determined to get straight A's, and I didn't realize how tough that would be until I turned into something in my first year, and I got a B on it, and I was shocked. And from that moment on, I lived at Regenstein, and my wife-to-be never saw me. And I'll tell you, here's what happened. This was typical of my experience there. We were living in Oak Park. I had a paper I had to write. And so at 8 o'clock that morning, I got up, and I went to the kitchen table, and on a typewriter, back in those days, I started typing this paper. I had it all written, all reported, had to write it. And my wife got ready, and she went off to work. And when she came home that evening, I was still sitting at that dining room table typing my paper. And we had dinner, and then I went back to typing, and she went to bed. And when she got up in the morning, I was still sitting at that dining room table. I was still typing that paper, and except to run to the bathroom and to have a quick sandwich, I had not moved. And she went off to work. And sometime around noon, what's that, like 36 hours later, I got up, my paper was done, up to the standards I thought the school demanded, and I got in my car and I drove all the way up to Hyde Park, and I turned in my paper, and I drove home, and I slept for 36 hours. But that was actually not that unusual to do things in that way. It was a very tough school. They demanded a lot, and I think it made me a much more disciplined worker. So I just want to mention a few more things. There are all these great names here that we're talking about today from the school. You'll hear more about them from the court theater players. But, you know, you have people like Graham Taylor, Julia Lathrop, Edith Abbott, all these big names. But what I wanted to say was I think all through this city and all through this country are people who went to SSA who are not the big names, but they're making this a better place to be. And from my own graduating class, there are three individuals I love to remember. One is Leslie Kaplan, who's one of the great social workers, and she's up at last I knew, she was at Evanston Hospital. Karen Singer, who runs the Evanston YWCA, and a guy named Bill Howard, who's on the west side. And Bill was a particular friend of mine. He is a guy who was really fantastic in the business world and had done very well. And he could have written his ticket anywhere, but he came back and went to school at SSA. And when he got out, he moved to the west side, and he's devoted his life to trying to find ways in a very business-like way to create affordable housing. It's the kind of thing where I think any of us who have gone to school here can point to so many people who are doing really great work. because of this school. So I just wanted to point it out, it's not just the big names. They're all over town. They're all over the country, and I think SSA gets the credit for that. One last thing, I want to say thanks to Jack Meltzer, best professor I ever had. I know he's not here, but I have to say it. And that's it. Now, what I'd like to do beyond that right now is introduce the dean of SSA now, Jean C. Marsh, who at the time I was at SSA was a professor, and she was really a big deal. Now, she really was. Even then, she was a big deal. It was some people, there were two folks who were big names. Harold Richmond was one, and Jean was the other. I guess I should have known she was destined to be the dean, but because I was not on the social work track, I was on the public policy track, I didn't have any courses with her. So I guess that's my misfortune. Let me read you a little bit of the bio. Dean Marsh, she's been the dean twice now, 1988 to 1998. And then again, in 2005, she came back to be the dean again to the present. And she has been with the university now for 30 years. So 3 out of every 10 years that this school has been here, Jean Marsh has been here. All right? And and if it's doing pretty well, I think you know where the credit lies. And I also understand that her daughter is a graduate of SSA. So it continues. Let me read what we've written here. Jean C. Marsh is the dean and the George Herbert Jones Distinguished Service Professor in the School of Social Service Administration at the University of Chicago. Her fields of special interest include services for women and families, treatment services for women and families, intersecting of multiple service systems, the relation of service delivery to treatment outcome, and knowledge utilization and practice, and program decision-making. Professor Marsh joined the University of Chicago faculty in 1978, 30 years ago, and held appointments in both the School of Social Service Administration and the Committee on Public Policy Studies. She has served as Dean of SSA from 1988 to 1998, and from 2005 to present. She has also served as visiting professor at the London School of Economics and at Clare Hall, Cambridge University. Professor Marsh has published broadly on issues of substance abuse, social service provision for women and children, and evaluation of social work interventions. She is co-author of 2 books, Informing Practice Decisions, published by Macmillan, and Rape and the Limits of Law Reform, published by Auburn House. She has been principal investigator on a number of studies and is currently principal investigator on a NIDA, I believe that's the National Institution of Drug Abuse, funded study of gender differences in the impact of substance abuse treatment services. Dean Marsh has received a number of honors and awards, including the NASW Award for Excellence in Social Work Research, service as Editor-in-Chief of Social Work, which we all read all the time when we were here, the Journal of the National Association of Social Workers, and as a board member for the Society for Social Work and Research. Could you please with me welcome Dean Jean C. Marsh.